about Putin's meeting. How did we get here today? Let me say that first. Why did we predict it? We couldn't say anything about it happening today, but I haven't memorized the name of the special envoy for the Middle East, who was also in charge of the Gaza-related ceasefire agreement. He went to Russia and picked up an American teacher who had been held captive in Moscow for 3 years, an American teacher who was a prisoner, an American teacher who was probably accused of espionage, and Trump made a statement with him in the White House yesterday. We speculated that if the special envoy had gone, then somehow a subsection of the meeting between Putin and Trump might have taken place. So it is true, or rather, it has come true, and our prediction was right. Trump. I just had a long and very productive phone conversation with Russian President Vladimir Putin. He said we discussed Ukraine, the Middle East, energy, artificial intelligence, the strength of the dollar, and many other issues. At the same time, to be about visiting their countries, he said we agreed to work very closely together. But first of all, we both agree what we both agree on. Russia, Ukraine. We want to stop the millions of deaths in the war. Now, translations can, of course, be a bit different. Let me say it one more time. As the most important issue they agreed on, stopping the killing would mean that the Russian-Ukrainian war suspension. These are the issues. While Donald Trump's statement that they have an agreement, will this end the war? How long will it take to start negotiations to end the war? How will it continue? These are important, but there was a 6-month deadline for his mission. After he arrived, he would finish it. I would somehow be able to afford it, but it turned out to be an empty phrase. Now, for the first time, Putin and Trump have had a phone call. I just had a long and very productive phone conversation with Russian President Vladimir Putin, and I'll quote Trump's statements. We talked about the Middle East, energy, artificial intelligence, the power of the dollar, and many other topics. How did they talk? Will they work together in that interesting field of artificial intelligence? That's interesting too. When I said energy, he said, if you don't do what I say, I'll cut off your gas supply. One topic, of course, and the Middle East. In what way can they talk about it? But they talked about Ukraine and the places where they were together. What we both agreed on is that we want to stop the millions of deaths that have occurred in the war with Russia-Ukraine. They talked about their willingness to stop the war. We agreed to work together very closely, including visiting each other's countries. Now from here, we can really, followed by I don't know if America is among those who implement it, but I don't remember exactly. Was it a criminal court decision? If you look at it, he won't implement it if America doesn't want to, and you know Putin can't travel to many countries anyway because of that decision. We have also agreed that our respective teams will start negotiations immediately, and we will start by informing the Ukrainian President Zelensky about the meeting by calling him, which I will do right now. From Washington in the United States or from the palace, the explanations of the meeting with Zelensky may come obviously. We can understand what the American president offered to Russia on Zelensky's behalf with the results that will come out of it, because Zelensky and Ukraine and America's most, as we have seen recently, they had an announcement to buy Ukraine's assets, and we have just reported today that the U.S. Treasury Secretary went there, and this is the new U.S. Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, who wants $500 billion of Ukraine's valuable assets to see how much we can buy, and he wants $500 billion of Ukraine's assets. Trump from Ukraine, as I said, most likely, well, how to talk to stop it. Since it doesn't talk like an intermediary, because Russia is in a position to say to Ukraine that the American side is like a party to the issue, but it may not be when it doesn't want to be. Right now, it is in a position to say to Ukraine, take this and give that. If he spoke in a tone similar to what he did with the Arab countries, as I said what promises he made to Putin regarding Ukraine, it is highly probable that he will soon. Speaking of Zelensky, who has been in contact with Ukraine, perhaps before talking to Putin, Zelensky may have already been told what to say through the Treasury Minister. The days that we are going to talk about have started again outside of the war. Let's remember what happens in such situations. More attacks can take place. More attacks can take place from the Russian side. Often more deadly things can be done on the way to the end because, let's hope it doesn't happen, because there are really huge losses for both sides, especially Ukraine now. Let me continue with his statements as a whole. Without adding anything, let me say once again, I just had a long and very productive phone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin, and we talked about Ukraine, the Middle East, energy, artificial intelligence, the power of the dollar, and many other issues. But first of all, as we both agree, Russia wants to stop the millions of deaths that have occurred in the war with Ukraine, including visiting each other's countries, working very closely together, including we have reached an agreement that our respective teams will start negotiations immediately, and we will start by calling President Zelensky of Ukraine and informing him about the meeting, which is what I will do right now. This part of the statement fulfills our prediction that contact with Zelensky may have been established, but let me remind you that the Treasury Minister did not go only for precious elements. If the Treasury Minister is going, it is highly likely that the CIA people he took with him on this issue, or the American representative there with someone from the embassy, even if only the Treasury Minister did not say, the speech about the meeting to be held today has already been transmitted to Zelensky. Zelensky already had a very uncomfortable demeanor afterwards in the same hall. Wasn't it from here that the live footage was coming from? Suggest? Hakan, is the current one live? Okay, Zelensky was talking standing alone in the section we didn't give him anyway, in this hall, most probably after this meeting. He was telling something standing with an even more uncomfortable attitude to the journalist there, most probably to Zelensky as well. In relation to the interview to be conducted or Trump. At the same time, Trump hosted a teacher at the White House yesterday who has been imprisoned in Russia for 3 years. He was Trump's special envoy for the Middle East. As I said, the two Americans were almost in Ukraine and Russia at the same time. Most probably, the infrastructure for today's meeting was somehow laid. The meeting between Putin and Trump lasted 1.5 hours. Putin invited Trump to Russia. Now that the invitation has been accepted, this strengthens the possibility that the first visit may be to Moscow. Trump may go to Moscow. I remember that he had already hosted Trump in the White House before, but whether Trump went to Russia or not is not in my memory. I asked Secretary of State Marco Rubio, CIA Director John Ratcliffe, National Security Advisor Michael Walls, and Ambassador Special Counsel Steve Witkoff. Steve Witkoff was the one who was in Russia. I asked Witkoff to lead the negotiations that I strongly believe will be successful if I were president. Millions of people have died in a war that will never happen, but that's why the war must end. American President Donald Trump held an hour-and-a-half-long meeting with Russian leader Vladimir Putin, and they both expressed a wish to stop the war in Ukraine, or rather they reached a consensus. Let's say we will see what will happen after that.